Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna keep watching the Napoleonic War series. And this is, I think, the second to last episode. This is Napoleon Endgame. So this is when Napoleon is defending France itself. Last time we saw him defending Germany, or the Confederation of the Rhine, on the Battle of Leipzig, which didn't go that well for Napoleon. It was a pretty major defeat. But we heard some foreshadowing that he might win some battles here in France, even though he was on the heel of defeat. Original videos down below. Let's go. Peace, peace. It's easy enough to say the word. I am giving up all that I possess in Germany.
In October 1813, Napoleon had suffered his heaviest ever defeat at Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations. Surviving French forces, exhausted, sick and demoralized, retreated to the River Rhine and prepared to defend France from invasion. But in November, the armies of the Sixth Coalition paused their advance. And Austrian Foreign Minister Metternich offered peace terms. The Frankfurt proposals would allow Napoleon to keep his throne if France returned to her so-called natural frontiers. It was the best offer Napoleon was likely to get, now that his back was to the wall, and all.
That is true, because he has been given, like, I don't know how many peace options, right? Like 3 maybe? In the last 2 years or so. But do you really take a peace offering when you're on the backs of a major defeat? I don't think so.
All Europe's great powers were united against him. Even so, he did not accept the terms. He merely agreed to reopen negotiations. To the Allies, and many in France itself, it proved that Napoleon would not listen to reason. The war went on, and by January 1814, Napoleon's situation looked even worse. Many of his besieged garrisons in the east were starved into surrender. Marshal Davout, with 34,000 men in Hamburg, was now besieged.
Yeah, we heard about that.
Denmark, one of France's last allies, was invaded by Bernadotte's Swedish army and made to join the coalition.
Makes sense, I guess.
French troops evacuated the Netherlands, which reasserted its independence after nearly 20 years of French control. In Italy, Eugene's army faced a new enemy, Joachim Murat, King of Naples, now marching north with 30,000 men to honor his new alliance with the Sixth Coalition. In Paris, Napoleon responded to the crisis with a series of extreme measures. Property taxes doubled, state salaries and pensions suspended, 300,000 new conscripts called up, from a country already exhausted by 20 years of war.
That's a little delusion from Napoleon there, right? Of course, he can make major defeats on the Allies. But I think, or maybe the thinking is that he defeats some armies of the coalitions and he can make a better peace offering, right? Maybe. I don't know. Or he just thinks that he can defeat them all over again. Like, just take out Austria or take out Prussia single-handedly. Keep Spain at bay, and Russia is alone, basically. I don't know how likely that is to happen, but okay.
He ordered the release of Pope Pius, under French house arrest for the last 5 years, to try to shore up his support in Italy. He even agreed to release Fernando, the Bourbon King of Spain, to take up his throne in exchange for peace between France and Spain. A condition that Fernando was in no position to honor. But these concessions were too little, far too late.
Yep.
In January, 2 coalition armies crossed the Rhine into France. Blücher's army of Silesia and Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia. Outnumbered French forces in their path could only fall back. On the 25th of January, Napoleon said farewell to his wife and son at the Tuileries Palace before leaving for the front. He would never see either of them again.
Wow.
With just 70,000 men, he faced odds of 4 to 1.
What?
Most of his troops were raw conscripts, some without uniforms, many just learning how to hold a musket. But for the first time in years, Napoleon's army was so small that he'd be able to exercise direct command over all its movements.
And that's good for Napoleon.
The result would be one of the most audacious and brilliant campaigns in history.
If the enemy are foolish enough to cross the Rhine, I will march to meet them. Then you will see the meaning of the word debacle.
The battle for France would be fought east of Paris, mostly across Champagne, a flat region divided by the rivers Marne and Seine and their tributaries. In late January, fields were dusted with snow and roads quickly turned to mud. Napoleon learned that the coalition armies were widely scattered.
That's not good.
Blücher's army near Napoleon's old college at Brienne. The emperor advanced rapidly, hoping to trap and destroy part of Blücher's army. But after...
I mean, let's just think about this. Napoleon's tactics, or one main tactic, was to defeat in detail, right? To divide and conquer. Now the coalition had just divided themselves, and the reason probably is to move quicker, which makes sense, and cover more ground, which also makes sense. But okay.
After a hard day's fighting that cost both sides 3,000 casualties, Blücher was able to retreat towards Schwarzenberg's army. That evening, Napoleon was nearly skewered by a charging Cossack, saved only by General Gorgo's good shooting. As Napoleon tried to work out the enemy's movements, Blücher, heavily reinforced by Schwarzenberg, made a surprise attack at La Rothière.
I mean, we're seeing throughout these battles in 1814, 1813, that the coalition armies are getting the jump on Napoleon, right? They're surprising Napoleon, which is a tactic that he did on them early on, right? So his enemies had learned a great deal. Let's see what Napoleon does.
Allied troops advanced through swirling snow to assault the village, defiantly held by young French conscripts. One was so inexperienced that Marshal Marmont had to personally show him how to load his musket during the battle. By late afternoon, Wreder's Bavarian Corps was falling on Napoleon's flank. Heavily outnumbered, Napoleon had no option but to retreat, having lost 5,000 casualties. 73 guns abandoned in the thick mud. The Allies' frontal attacks meant their losses were greater, but by combining their armies, they defeated Napoleon on French soil for the first time.
Major blow.
Believing Napoleon would now retreat towards Paris, the Allies decided to advance along 2 routes to ease pressure on the roads. Blücher would take a northern route along the Marne. Schwarzenberg would follow the Seine. But dividing their armies again would play right into Napoleon's hands.
But it makes sense why they would do that. The study of it has given me a greater idea of his genius than any other. Duke of Wellington,
After 2 days to reorganize, Napoleon continued his retreat to Nogent, where he learned that the Allies had split their armies. Not only that, they were advancing at different speeds. The aggressive Blücher racing ahead, while the more cautious Schwarzenberg lagged behind. Leaving Oudinot and Victor to guard the Seine bridges and delay Schwarzenberg, Napoleon raced north through mud and rain with 30,000 men. The army of Silesia was strung out on the march, oblivious to the danger it was in. First, Napoleon fell on General Ossouffiev's Russian 9th Corps at Champaubert, destroying it, taking its commander and 2,000 men prisoner. The next morning, he marched on General Osten-Sacken's force.
The next morning.
Montmiral. This was a much larger force, with 2 infantry and 1 cavalry corps, and was expecting support from York's Prussian 1st Corps. But the Prussians were late.
Look at that.
And Sacken's troops could not withstand the French onslaught.
I can't
At this
understand
desperate hour, the Emperor's elite Old Guard were no longer held back, but were often thrown into the thick of the fighting. By the end of...
Which makes sense why you would want to use the Old Guard, because they can give you probably a little bit quicker victories that Napoleon needs. But also you're losing the men of the Old Guard, which are basically your reserve. Elite reserve. But okay.
The day, Napoleon had inflicted another 3,500 casualties, twice his own losses, and the Allies were in rapid retreat. Napoleon had ordered Marshal MacDonald to cut off the enemy's escape by seizing the Marne Bridge at Chateau Thierry. But York's Prussians got there first. The next day, Napoleon could only batter their rear guard as the enemy fled across the Marne, destroying the bridge behind them.
And Schwarzenberg is advancing.
Sending Marshal Mortier to rebuild the bridge and continue the pursuit, Napoleon doubled back to rejoin Marmont, who had been left to keep watch on Blücher. Napoleon attacked at Vauchamp, using General Grouchy's cavalry to outflank Blücher's army, which was soon in headlong retreat. A merciless French pursuit inflicted 6,000 Prussian and Russian casualties. Napoleon lost just 600 men.
Oh my!
Napoleon had taken on an enemy army almost twice his size, and beaten it 4 times in just 6 days. Blücher had lost an estimated 15,000 casualties in battle, and another 15,000 in smaller engagements, as stragglers or deserters. For now...
One thing though. So the enemy sort of, at least Blücher maybe haven't learned that much from Napoleon's tactics, more of Napoleon's marshals. Maybe, I don't, because... But again, Napoleon can win how many victories he wants to, but at some point, he's got sort of entire Europe against him, so yeah, I don't know.
The army of Silesia had been scattered and neutralized.
For now, it looks
but in the south, Marshals Victor and Oudinot had not been able to prevent Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia from crossing the Seine in 3 places.
No, because it's a big army.
Austrian troops were now just 40 miles from Paris. Leaving Mortier and Marmont to keep watch on Blücher, Napoleon raced south. Schwarzenberg, alarmed by news of Blücher's defeat and of Napoleon's approach, immediately ordered a retreat. It was too late for Wittgenstein's advance guard, routed at Mormain with 2,000 casualties. Napoleon sent Victor's 2nd Corps to seize the bridge at Montereau, but was so infuriated by its slow progress that he sacked Victor and gave his corps to General Gérard.
Victor is gone.
The next day at the Battle of Montereau, the French drove the Allied Württemberg Corps back across the river with 30% losses. According to some accounts, the emperor sighted the French cannon himself, as he had at Lodi 18 years before.
Yep.
Napoleon had the Allies on the run. But how long could it last?
That's true. Recollect what your military position is. If we act with military and political prudence, how can France resist a peace demanded by 600,000 warriors? Let her if she
Even
dare.
as fighting continued, negotiations between France and the coalition reopened at Châtillon-sur-Seine on the 5th of February.
Okay.
The Allied terms were now more severe. A return to France's frontiers of 1791, which meant the additional loss of Belgium, a humiliation that Napoleon refused to accept. Instead, he tried to revive the Frankfurt proposals, hoping to play for time and to split the coalition, whose war aims varied from Britain's hard line to Austria's more ambiguous position.
Okay.
But this hope was thwarted by British Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh. On the 1st of March, he persuaded the Allies to sign the Treaty of Chaumont. In it, Russia, Prussia, Austria and Great Britain agreed to keep 150,000 troops in the field and not to negotiate separately with France.
Wow,
Britain
that's very
added
important.
the sweetener of a £5 million subsidy to be shared among the Allies.
Oh my.
The treaty's secret articles specified common war aims, including the future independence of the German states, Switzerland and Italy, while Spain was to be returned to the Bourbons and Holland to the House of Orange.
Okay. Sure.
The four powers even agreed that once they'd defeated Napoleon, they'd form a 20-year defensive alliance to maintain peace in Europe, a sign of their newfound commitment to each other. A split in the coalition had been Napoleon's last best hope for a favourable peace.
Yep.
That was gone.
Yep.
And news from across the country was bleak. French cities were surrendering to the Allies without a fight. Nancy, Dijon and Mâcon had all fallen. In the south, Wellington defeated Marshal Soult at Orthez, forcing him to fall back on Toulouse. 2 weeks later, as British troops approached the city of Bordeaux, it declared loyalty to France's Bourbon kings. The mayor himself rode out to greet the British, bearing a white cockade, the sign of Bourbon allegiance.
Okay.
Napoleon's hope for a nation in arms to resist the Allies had not materialized.
Yeah,
Allied
like Spain
troops,
and Russia.
particularly Cossacks, often robbed French civilians and committed some atrocities.
Yeah.
French peasants took revenge when they could, but there was no guerrilla war to mirror what French troops had encountered in Spain or Russia.
Yeah,
the chief desire among ordinary French people was for peace, at almost any price.
Yeah. Dangers crowded upon him, encompassed him, oppressed him from every side, but he sought to escape from them by misrepresenting them to himself.
Any talk of Napoleon's defeat in late February was premature. The French emperor was driving Schwarzenberg's army of Bohemia before him, even though it was twice his size.
Yeah. But the reason why he's doing that is because Schwarzenberg heard of Blücher's defeats. But if Blücher is advancing, like it looks like he's doing, then Schwarzenberg just going to attack Napoleon, or at least go towards Paris. So,
but Schwarzenberg scrambled to safety behind the river Aube.
Okay.
Napoleon knew he had to land another decisive blow soon.
Yep.
So turned his attention back to Blücher. After an aborted attempt to join forces with Schwarzenberg, Blücher had decided to resume his advance on Paris, gathering reinforcements en route, and with only Marmont and Mortier's weak corps to oppose him.
Okay, that makes sense.
Leaving Marshal MacDonald in command in the south, Napoleon set off to intercept Blücher. covering 60 miles in 3 days, along terrible roads choked with mud.
Yeah.
At Napoleon's approach, Blücher retreated across the Marne, burning the bridges behind him.
Makes sense.
24 hours later, they'd been rebuilt by French engineers.
Wow, how
Napoleon
quick.
was poised to crush Blücher against the Aisne River, because the major crossing point at Soissons was held by a Franco-Polish garrison.
Wow.
But after just a day's fighting, the garrison commander at Soissons tamely surrendered, allowing Blücher to escape.
Uh-oh.
Napoleon continued his pursuit across the Aisne, still hoping to cut off the army of Silesia.
Yeah, makes sense.
But at Craon, he encountered Russian troops in a strong defensive position. The Russians fought stubbornly. The French finally forced the enemy to withdraw, but only at the cost of 6,000 casualties.
Wow.
Including many irreplaceable veterans from Napoleon's guard.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
Napoleon pushed on to Laon. But by now, Blücher had concentrated his forces.
Yep.
98,000 troops in all.
Oh my.
And outnumbered Napoleon 2 to 1.
Okay.
French attacks were repulsed, while Marmont's corps was caught off guard by a late Allied counterattack and routed. Napoleon was lucky to avoid a much heavier defeat. Blücher, usually aggressive to the point of recklessness, was unwell and had been told Napoleon's army was twice as big as it was, leading him to act with unusual caution.
Who told him that, though? But okay.
Laon was a heavy blow to Napoleon.
Yeah.
6,500 casualties he could not afford.
Yep.
Undaunted, he fell back to Soissons, and after a brief moment to reorganize, he marched on the city of Reims, which had just fallen to Saint-Priest's Russian corps.
Okay.
In a whirlwind assault, Napoleon retook the city. Saint-Priest himself was mortally wounded, his corps routed.
Wow.
Meanwhile, in the south, Schwarzenberg had resumed his offensive as soon as he found out Napoleon had gone north.
Makes sense.
In heavy fighting, he'd driven Oudinot and MacDonald back from the River Aube. 5 days later, the Allies had recaptured Troyes, as MacDonald retreated behind the River Seine.
Okay.
Now, after 4 days to rest and reorganize his battered army, Napoleon was coming south once more.
Uh-oh.
Schwarzenberg, emboldened by news of Napoleon's defeat at Laon, decided that this time he would stand and fight.
Okay.
Napoleon advanced on Arcis-sur-Aube, ignoring reports that the enemy was not retreating as he believed, but gathering for battle. As heavy fighting broke out, Napoleon still believed he faced only the enemy rearguard. It was a nasty surprise to discover that he faced the entire might of the army of Bohemia. 28,000 men against 80,000.
Yeah.
In desperate fighting, Napoleon personally rallied fleeing troops and exposed himself to enemy fire, having his horse killed under him by an exploding shell. But the odds were too great.
Yeah.
At the end of the second day, Napoleon was forced to order the retreat.
Yeah. I saw a glorious death disputing foot by foot the soil of the country. The bolts flew around me. My clothes were pierced, but none reached me. Wow.
Napoleon believed his army was now too weak to take on the Allies directly.
Yeah.
So he decided to change strategy.
Okay.
He would march into the rear of the Allied armies, join up with some of his isolated garrisons, and cut the enemy's lines of communication, forcing them to abandon their advance on Paris.
Okay, that's pretty smart. But again, he's hedging his bets, which Napoleon usually was doing, right? He was betting on he knew more than his enemy knew. But if Blücher and Schwarzenberg are just advancing on Paris, and Napoleon is going behind their and on their lines, in cutting their communication lines, maybe they don't care that much about that. Or nah, because they can just live off the land. I don't know. It seems like a good strategy, but okay, let's see how it plays out though.
But the Allies, until now always one step behind Napoleon, had just received crucial information. Talleyrand, the most brilliant French diplomat of the age, and the most slippery. He'd served France's monarchy, the Revolution, then Napoleon, until in 1807 he fell out irrevocably with the Emperor over foreign policy.
Okay.
He now believed that Napoleon was dragging France into ruin, and worked behind the scenes to ensure his downfall.
Okay.
From Paris, he wrote to the Russian Emperor Alexander at Allied headquarters, informing him that in the capital, support for Napoleon was crumbling, and the city's defences had been completely neglected. He urged the Allies to march immediately on Paris, without allowing Napoleon to distract them. Talleyrand's information was confirmed when the Allies intercepted a report from Napoleon's chief of police, General Savary, meant for the Emperor. The treasury, arsenals and powder stores are empty. We are completely at the end of our resources. The population is discouraged and discontented, wishing peace at any price. As Napoleon advanced on Saint-Dizier, the Allies sent General Witzingerode and 10,000 cavalry to harass his army and to screen their own movements. Then began their march on Paris. At Fère-Champenoise, they collided with Marmont and Mortier's corps, advancing to join Napoleon. An entire National Guard division, 5,000 men, was virtually wiped out as the marshals suffered a crushing defeat.
Wow.
Napoleon feared that the fall of Paris would be a fatal blow to his regime.
Yeah.
His political authority and ability to wage war might not recover.
Yep.
So when he received news of the Allies' movements, he tore up his plans and ordered a forced march back to Paris, intending to lead its defense in person.
Wow. But how is he seeing, like, not the future, but like, okay, you're under siege in Paris. What are you thinking that you're going to do to win? Do you want another peace treaty, like, which is probably worse than the one you've got from, what was it, 1797 or something, right? Which, yeah, I don't know what he's thinking here, right? He's digging a big hole here. Okay.
Napoleon's wife and son were evacuated from the capital, along with most of his ministers. His brother, Joseph, the ex-king of Spain, was in charge of the city's defences, but had done little.
Nice.
Paris was awash with rumours of treachery and defeat.
Yep.
Marmont and Mortier were able to reach Paris before the Allies, adding their troops to the garrison. It now totaled 37,000 men, including some hardened veterans of the Guard, but many more young conscripts. While a third were part-time soldiers of the National Guard.
But
the Allies had 120,000 seasoned troops outside the city. And given the urgency of taking Paris before Napoleon could intervene, their elite guards and grenadier divisions would lead the way.
Makes sense.
On the 30th of March, they began their assault from the north.
Wow.
Heavy fighting raged throughout the day. The city's defenders fought bravely, inflicting several thousand casualties on the advancing enemy. But defeat was inevitable.
Yeah.
That night, to save Paris from destruction, Marshal Marmont agreed to surrender the city, on condition the garrison was permitted to leave with its weapons.
Okay.
At the Hôtel des Invalides, the 71-year-old Marshal Serrurier oversaw the burning of 1,400 flags and standards captured from France's enemies.
Wow.
As well as Frederick the Great's sword and sash.
No.
So they would not fall into Allied hands.
Why? No. Why would you burn that one? I understand the standards and flags. Why? I can understand the thinking, but still. Okay. Desperate. I mean, it's desperate times, but this is surely desperate measures, but okay.
Napoleon was just 15 miles from Paris when he was informed of the city's surrender.
Okay.
He sat with his head in his hands for 15 minutes.
We do not intend to expose Paris to the fate of Moscow. Fair point. Not burn it down, right? So what? In the context of this, it seems like Napoleon's plan was to just burn Paris or something, right? Because that is what the Russians did to Moscow before Napoleon got there. So before the coalition gets to Paris, he intends to burn Paris. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Or just that under a siege, Paris will be destroyed, right? Okay.
On the 31st of March 1814, France's enemies marched into Paris for the first time since the 100 Years' War.
Wow.
Parisian...
Wait. Since the 100 Years' War. Is that like 500 years ago from their point? 1300s? When was it? Right? I think so. 1300s. Maybe. Yeah, Edward III. Right? And then the Black Prince. Or not only them, but yeah. Henry V as well. But I mean, since the 100 Years' War, no enemy has been into Paris. I mean, then you can just say, then you can ask yourself, how many years since enemies were in London? But okay.
Crowds cheered the three Allied monarchs, bringers of
Makes
peace.
sense. Sure.
Everyone in Paris was suddenly a royalist once more.
Yep.
Above all, they cheered for Emperor Alexander of Russia, now hailed as Europe's savior.
Maybe because the French people maybe have more connection with him because of the peace treaty at Tilsit, right? That he seemed more reasonable to have a peace treaty with Napoleon when he was such a great power, right? Than the Brits or something like that, right? Okay.
Don Cossacks bivouacked on the Champs-Élysées. Allied troops generally behaved well.
Okay.
35 miles away, Napoleon was at Fontainebleau with 36,000 men, all of them hungry and exhausted after their 100-mile forced march.
Yep.
Nevertheless, Napoleon began
April
planning an immediate advance on Paris.
Yeah, that's a joke.
But for the first time, he faced unanimous opposition from his ministers and marshals, including Ney, MacDonald, Oudinot, and Berthier. They reminded him of his oath to act for the good of France.
Yep.
He accused them of disloyalty, acting only to save themselves. They told him the war was lost, and he must abdicate in favor of his son if possible.
Okay.
On the 4th of April, Marshal Marmont surrendered his entire corps to the coalition, which was marched over to the enemy lines against the wishes of many of its officers and men.
Yeah,
this was a devastating blow to Napoleon, and encouraged the Allies to reject his offer of a conditional abdication in favor of his son. 2 days later, he abdicated without conditions.
Wow.
The Allied powers, having proclaimed that the Emperor Napoleon is the only obstacle to the re-establishment of peace in Europe, the Emperor Napoleon, faithful to his oath, declares that he renounces for himself and his heirs the thrones of France and Italy, and that there is no personal sacrifice, including his life, that he is not ready to make in the interests of France.
Oof.
Napoleon's abdication was formalized by the Treaty of Fontainebleau,
Look
by
how
which
quick
he
that
was allowed to keep the title of emperor, become sovereign of the small island of Elba, and retain a bodyguard of 400 men.
Elba I know about, yeah, okay.
News came too late to prevent Wellington's attack on Toulouse, leading to a costly and pointless battle, with more than 7,000 casualties.
Oh my. Just in vain.
The night after his abdication, Napoleon tried to commit suicide, using the poison that had been made for him in Russia in case of capture.
Sure.
But it had lost its potency, and he survived.
Nice.
2 weeks later, Napoleon bade farewell to his old guard at Fontainebleau Palace.
Wow.
And began his journey into exile.
Wow, how quick that was. I have been wrong. Maybe in my plans I have done harm in war. But is it all like a dream?
The Napoleonic Wars, which had raged on land and sea for 11 years, seemed finally at an end.
I mean, 11 years of Napoleonic Wars, but then the revolutions and all the coalitions. It's more like 2 decades of war. Not constant war, because there were some peace treaties in here, like a couple of months, maybe a year, but still like 20 years of war. But okay, yeah, Napoleonic Wars, yes, when he's like sort of the leader, or one of the leaders of France. Yeah.
The death toll is unknown, but historians estimate that 2 to 3 million lives were lost across Europe.
Yeah. Military or...
Most soldiers died not in battle, but from disease. Many thousands were left maimed and disfigured.
Yep.
For most of this period, Napoleon was master of Europe.
Yep.
Imposing treaties on humbled enemies, redrawing frontiers, overthrowing old regimes, and making new kings. And
getting rid, not him, but he made the defeat on Austria, so Austrian Emperor Francis got rid of the Holy Roman Empire, which have been not functionally working, but was an empire nonetheless for 1,000 years. So, and Napoleon has put sort of more liberal constitution and whatnot throughout Europe, which is going to spark a lot of revolutions across Europe. Okay.
He was the last figure in history to combine total political power with frontline military genius.
Yeah.
In the mold of Alexander and Caesar.
And I argued that Napoleon did it better than both of them. Because France still exists, even after Napoleon is gone. But the Macedonian Empire under Alexander, doesn't exist. North Macedonia exists, okay. The Roman Empire doesn't exist, or Roman Republic when Caesar were there, it doesn't exist. Italy might do, and Rome, the city, yes. But Napoleon, I argue, did both better. Right? Political power and military genius, like they said. Okay.
But it seemed Napoleon's reign was to end in abject military defeat.
Yep.
However, exile on Elba did not prove to Napoleon's taste.
Yeah.
In less than 10 months, he would return to France to fight one last great campaign to reclaim his throne.
Yep. Wow, that was epic. I can't wait to see that one. Wow, that's epic. But yeah, Napoleon abdicated here, 1814, yeah. It felt pretty slow when he got those victories. But then when he began to lose, it just became quicker and quicker and quicker, and then he abdicated. Right? But yeah, but Napoleon has a lot of ambition, so leaving him on Elba, okay, he's Emperor of Elba, right? And that's humiliating. But he still has ambition and drive, and he's gonna come back to France. We'll see that in the next episode, the final episode, right? Of how he tries to come back, right? Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!